Welcome to BAM It with John Michael and Mari, covering all things business, accounting, management, marketing, and IT, the place where businesses and entrepreneurs find the forest through the trees.
Hello and welcome to BAM It. I am John Michael Cletus and I'm here with
Mari Peterson of Marketing Outpost.
And today's episode, we're going to be talking about managing self. We have a guest in the studio today, Amy Kosh. And as always, BAM It is brought to you by Peridot Consulting, Inc. and Marketing Outpost. And we want to thank Amy for joining us today. And before we jump right in, the interesting fact, I was excited to hear it when Amy came in. We were talking about interesting facts, and she told me that life coaching was started by what at first I was excited because we thought it was an accountant, but she corrected me and said it was a financial advisor. So whatever, but I'm gonna let Amy explain to me about that story. How did it get started, and what is life coaching in general?
Yeah, so I found this out by happenstance. And so Thomas Leonard in the late 70s was the guy who started life coaching, and he gave it that name. And he was a financial advisor who was working with Werner Erhard in the EST and personal development movement. And they both ended up being heavily involved with landmark education, which was a much larger entity. But Leonard was the guy who finally realized that all of his financial people really wanted more assistance and more information than he was giving them just financially. And so he started coaching them. And he's the one who created the term life coach. So it started back in the late 60s, early 70s.
Well, yeah, I think people in a professional standpoint, I guess financial advisors in that point, kind of in some ways you turn into a therapist. You hear that a lot about real estate agents or therapists, but I can see how that maybe organically came along. Yeah. So what is life coaching? If we wanted to, what exactly is that?
Yeah. So generally life coaching is looking for or talking to somebody who can give you a different perspective on your own life. Human beings are really good at doing us, but we're terrible at seeing our own blind spots. And so a life coach, just like any other advisor, can help you see the thing that you're missing and the thing the habit that keeps coming up and how that keeps you stuck in your life. So it's really just another advisor that you might have. And there are a million different kinds of life coaches. So that makes the process a little more challenging to find.
So I want to dig into that a little bit more and address also your background and experience. Mm-hmm. In our neck of the woods of Asheville, North Carolina, you hear that term life coach a lot. It is with many other common occupations out there. The distinction is in education, experience, and certification, which I see reading your bio, you do have a lot of. So can you share that about it?
Sure.
About your background and experience?
Yeah. So I came into coaching through an academic and consulting career. I was teaching at university for a long time. I was teaching photography and fine art. And a lot of what that is teaching people how to see the world in a different way, literally. I was also teaching yoga and meditation for about 25 years. I've been teaching those. And again, they're really about seeing the world in a different way, experiencing the world in a different way. And all the consulting work I've done, all of the training and education I've had in positive psychology and a number of other things, they literally all pull together. And it's really about how do you expand your experience in the world and what are the possible choices that you get to make. So yeah, I've come across, there's a lot of coaches. Again, there's not really a set of certifications that are industry standard yet, although we are definitely moving in that direction. And I think it's a great direction to go in. Right now, you can be certified to coach through any number of programs. And if you want the ICF registration, which is the International Coaching Federation, that is one of two governing bodies that provide guidelines and standards of practice. And so one of the things when people call me and they're checking out whether coaching is for them, I always say, call a couple of coaches and talk to them and see who feels like a good fit, but also check to see that they're actually certified and trained. Because otherwise you're just getting somebody who is maybe really great at giving advice, or they might be really good at being a coach, but they also don't have the background and training to know maybe when not to say something or when not to coach someone.
Yeah, so a lot of your clientele
Mhm.
are self-employed people or executives. What is sort of a typical client that you sort of have? Is that
Yeah.
pretty much your typical client?
Yeah, my typical clients tend to be, interestingly enough, they tend to be men, which is also turned out were the students who used to stay the latest after class. And I always wondered about that, and I realized, well, I'm kind of not typical. I've spent a lot of my time growing up building the house that we lived in, and I renovated houses for a living to put myself through college, and I renovated old cars. So, what often people come when they're calling me, most of the people who call me tend to be like newly minted CEOs and executives or women who own their own businesses. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and I love working with people who are really self-starters and they're used to solving their own problems, and they don't necessarily have a lot of advisors around them. They often have one or two key people that they really trust and that they'll really work closely with when they're trying to create whatever they're trying to create in their business or even personally. The other thing that always shows up, which is fascinating to me, is that they always say the same thing. My life looks great on paper, and I'm just not happy. Like I thought I would be happier. And they can't figure out what the missing piece is. And those are the people that I love working with, because as they change their perspective and they can see more broadly what's going on in their lives and what are the habits that are showing up, all of a sudden there's this aha moment. And sometimes it takes 15 minutes for them to see it. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer to work through it. But often, it's that moment of like, oh, that's the thing I've been doing that I didn't realize I was doing.
Yeah, it's funny how what you think should make you happy and versus what makes you happy. And I guess is that maybe what a lot of what you flesh out is that people, they say, hey, I'm doing great. I'm I've got the career of my dreams. I'm married, but I'm miserable, because in reality, do you find that after those aha moments, it's a big major change, or it's a tweak, or it's just a new outlook?
It can be all three of those, to be honest. There's usually the aha moment of, oh shit, that's what I've been doing. And then knowing that, they start to see where in their lives that is showing up. So imagine that you're walking around with a stone in your shoe, but it's small enough that for a long time you don't really notice it. And then you go for a run and all of a sudden you're like, wow, there's a stone under my heel. Yeah. That really hurts, except that you're at a place where you can't stop. Right? So maybe there's a bear chasing you because it's Western North Carolina. Yeah. So now you're running with a stone in your shoe and it's getting really, really painful. And the more you run, the more painful it gets. And then you start limping, and then your knee starts hurting, and then your hip starts hurting. So there's that awareness of, oh, there's a stone in my shoe. That's the aha moment. And then there is this, okay, I got to change something up, because the way I'm doing things now is continuing to carry that stone in my shoe. So then it's a matter of restructuring. So it's awareness built with new habits, new patterns, and catching when that stone shows up again. And it shows up in every area of people's lives. That's the other thing that I love about coaching. People come to me and they're like, oh, I don't know what job I want, or I don't know if this is the right career or the right business for me to start. And working with them, we start to see, well, what's the thing that's creating the doubt? Because that's creating doubt in every single area of their lives. And once they see it, then the whole structure has a chance to change. And that's where a lot of the work of coaching comes in. But it's also where you see the biggest changes in someone, 3 months down the road or 6 months down the road, because all of it has been changed or starting to change.
So one of the things that you mentioned is being a visionary. Mm-hmm. And what does being a visionary mean, and what part does it play in your coaching?
So being a visionary has a couple of different meanings, and I chose that word very intentionally. The first meaning for me is to be forward thinking and always looking at the future and where does my client want to go? What do they want to create for themselves, whether it's their business or whether it's an individual? there is also this aspect of visionary work, meaning holistic work. So, as I said, the moment you discover what's holding you back in one area of your life or your business, you're going to start to see that same thing showing up in a lot of areas. And that's a really holistic approach. It's not like you can't change one thing, right? Because everything will change. So there's that aspect of visionary work as well. I'm also kind of a science geek. And so there is a level of quantum mechanics that often comes into my coaching, which sounds a little crazy to say. But when you start to think about how quantum physics has explained that we live in a single field, literally a field of energy, and we are all made up of that same energy. When you start to understand that there aren't as many differences between people, between things, between all of the things that we can see in our lives, then it gives us a different access point to work with not only each other, but it can help a boss understand his employees much better. It can, once you understand how physically our bodies co-regulate, because science has gotten into all of this wonderful understanding about if you sit 5 people in a room, their heartbeats will eventually start to beat at the same pace, which I think is really cool. So that idea of being a visionary in terms of what can I bring to this? What can I bring to the coaching work I do that really helps my clients move and that can help people understand, well, how does the system work? So there's that aspect of being a visionary as well.
So you also mentioned, I like the science of things. I like the connectivity that you talk about, and we're all part of the sort of the same energy.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that you work with a lot of people in business, entrepreneurs. So how can this, I guess, principle and your coaching help a small business owner?
So small business owners, and I've been one for a while now, and I was a freelancer for a very long time. We are faced with a couple of things because as a business owner, you're dealing with all of the business growth, and you're also dealing often with interpersonal and personal relationships within the company, within your employees, and you're trying to create a culture. So whether you have 2 employees or 200 or 2,000, the culture that you want to create is really how you see your business moving forward. So by having a coach who can come in and talk about, okay, here's what I see happening, here's where I see you want to be, and here's the disconnect piece, or here's the part that you're not seeing is creating a disjunction between where you want to be now, or where you want to be in the future, and where you are now. So a coach, and in some ways, one of the coaching pieces I love the best is to come in and really work with business owners who want to create a cohesive and coherent culture of growth. And so part of that is coaching the individual business owner or CEO. And then part of it is also working with groups of individuals, either managers or employees as a group, to understand how can they see themselves within the culture of the whole.
Amy, she's helped us out in the Roundtable series before, and you kind of did some of those exercises with that group at the time, and it was really, we hear the term aha moment a lot, but what Amy does, and one of the reasons I love her and engage with her, and I'm glad she's here today, is she does bring that, when you're stuck in that rut of having that day-to-day, I'm in my business, working in the business, or even working on your business, it's taking that step out and looking at the whole picture of your life and comparing that, with what you're doing in your day-to-day rut of your cycle. Rolled out those aha moments of the purpose. Mm-hmm. So anyways, let's get into the tangible, I guess. So what if somebody were to engage your services, what's a typical engagement like, and a typical session, for example? Like how does it work?
So I normally work with people every week for 12 weeks. And we do a half-hour coaching call. We start with a 1-hour call that is the strategy call. And then after that, it's a weekly call so that they have absolutely no excuse not to do the work and not to coach. And I really don't let people off the hook.
I'm going to interrupt you. I apologize. When you say do the work, what does that mean?
So I can show you or help you see the disconnect and what habit is showing up that is creating the problem for you in your business or in your personal life. And usually it's showing up in both. But I can't do the work for somebody. So we might be coaching on, like I had a client one time and he was really, he's my favorite client ever.
What, was it me?
No, it wasn't you. I'm sorry. But he always tried to stump me and I loved it. So he showed up one day because I had said, hey, you can bring any topic to the coaching call you want. I guarantee we will get to the thing that is really important. And he thought, oh, I'm gonna stump her this time. So he said, when I said, what do you want to coach on today? He said, I couldn't decide whether to have a croissant or a donut for breakfast. And I said, really? So what was it that made the croissant more appealing? And he told me that. And then I said, so what was it that made the donut more appealing? And then he told me that. And then we talked about what value each of those two things had. And as we're talking about the value, he also started to notice there was this voice in his head going, oh, you shouldn't have a donut because of this, and you shouldn't have a donut because of that. And so I asked the question, well, where else in your life does that voice show up? Where is it showing up in your business about something that you see has some value, but you're avoiding it because you think you shouldn't offer that either as a culture or to your team or to your company? And so we took this, he thought this was going to be a throwaway question. And he walked out, after a half an hour going, oh, now I see where I'm actually holding my company back because of an assumption I've made about what it's supposed to look like to be a CEO. So again, it's that for me that's where the payoff is for me in coaching because it's fun, but it's also that's where the work gets done because then he saw it. So his job then is to go forward understanding this is how I've been holding my company back. This is what I need to do. These are the steps I need to take in order to move it forward from this point. And so in between coaching calls, people are doing the work. And sometimes it's a week long, sometimes it's 2 weeks. Some people have worked with me for a year because it takes a year to create the wholesale change that they really want to be creating. Other people work with me for a month or two.
Yeah, I'm sure in many ways, people that might engage your services, they might come and they're like, you know what? I don't even know what I don't know. Like, I know there's something.
I love them.
And I'm engaging your services because, I need help, like those people, like you said earlier, on paper, their life is great. But I wouldn't even know to say, I don't know the difference between a croissant and a donut. I'm just, I wouldn't even know I would have those thought processes. Mm-hmm. So I'm internalizing it. But,
yeah.
Those people that approach you, they just don't even know.
So I get a lot of people who call me and they're like, I have no idea. I'm just not really happy. And then there's this long pause. Right? And so there's this long pause. And then I always find a question to ask them. And the question comes more from what experience am I having listening to them? Because there's always something in someone's voice that gives you a clue as to what's going on. And so again, that's part of the holistic way that I work. It might be that somebody says, oh, yeah, I moved to Asheville like a year ago and I'm just not happy. I don't know. I don't really know. Well, my question would then be about, well, what did you leave? What got you to move to Asheville? Because that's a way into understanding what's part of what is holding them stuck. Or they might say, oh, I got promoted at work and I wasn't expecting it at all. Okay, so there I already hear surprise in their voice. And I hear that they're not feeling so confident. So that's where I start the conversation with them. And then that initial strategy conversation is really about finding out, why are they calling me? Articulating some of the general goals and what can we do through coaching to get them there. And then I always give a recommendation. I'll give you a prescription of sorts to say, well, here's what I hear is going on for you. And then a recommendation about what's likely to happen in coaching. Do I hear, that it's one small little thing that they want to work on and that might take a couple months? Or is it really wholesale change? And that might be a year-long program.
So it's something that interested me that you mentioned is that you ask a lot of questions. It sounds to me like you're very good at being objective and listening, but it's not always what people are saying to you, but maybe what they're not saying that you also pick up on.
A lot of it is what they're not saying or how they're saying something. I mean, one of the practices that I often have people do, which is the hardest practice ever, but I'll give it to you guys and then you can take it home and see if you like it, is to stand in front of a mirror and say, I am amazing. But you have to look at your own eyes in the
John Michael
mirror.
does that every morning. I know it. I know he stands there and says, damn, you're good.
I stand there and say, I think I need to shave, is what I do. No, I don't know if I could do that. You were just saying do that. I don't know if I could get that out of my...
You could, but would you?
Yeah.
So the question, and I'll throw this out to anybody listening too, is try this in the morning for 7 days straight. You have to do it 10 times. So you stand and you look in the mirror and you look at your own eyes in the mirror and you say, I am amazing. And it sounds really hokey and it's going to feel really awkward and strange when you start. But I guarantee by the end of the week, something will change and you will notice the change. You'll feel the change and other people around you will start to comment on the change. And that's all it takes, right, to start to create change. But it is one of the hardest practices ever.
Well, I agree with you because I believe that sometimes when I work with clients on developing marketing goals, what is not said is what is their conscious talking about. And that conscious voice is very, very powerful. So when you can change the conscious voice or change the language or change what you're saying to yourself and actually say it out loud, and better yet, put it on paper, then I think it also starts to change that the energy around you. It's like you've put that voice out there and now the universe says, oh, I know what you want. You've had it stuck in your head, but now I know what you want. Now we can start working toward those things that you're actually putting out there. So I think when you say something like that every day. So John Michael, maybe you should stand in front of the mirror every day for the next 7 days and say, I am going to relax. I mean, you should. It's tax season.
So I have to say though, that's aspirational and that's essentially yelling at yourself. So I'm not a fan of that idea.
Do you yell at yourself?
I think Mari just wanted the opportunity to yell at me. I think.
Right.
Are you saying I need to relax? Is that what you're saying?
I'm just saying I'm encouraging you. We're like less than 20 days away from tax day, so I'm sure you're feeling the pressure by now.
I am amazing, Mari.
I will second that.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to change a little bit in that just there's therapy, which I know isn't what you're doing, and then there's coaching. And I know there's just a ignorance between the two.
Yeah.
So what is the difference between therapy and coaching?
And thank you for asking, because that is a key point. And it's also one I check for when people call me for a strategy call to see about coaching. So therapy, the best way I can describe it is a therapist will ask you, where are you now? And then you'll spend a lot of time looking at how you got there. And coaching, a coach will say, where are you now? Where do you want to be? Let's look at what is working and let's make more of what is working. And let's create that, we'll move that gap or remove that gap from where you are now to where you want to be, because that gap is where the coaching happens. Another way to look at it is I've used the metaphor of a bicycle. So if you want to learn how to ride a bicycle, you'll stand there with the bicycle and the therapist will talk to you about, all of your history with bicycles and how you got this bicycle and how you might look at this bicycle and experience it. And a coach will make you sit on the bicycle and then will walk alongside you as you pedal.
Yeah. So it's goal oriented and it's also accountability driven as well.
Yeah.
Like that, like you said, you give them
homework.
I was going to say not to use the term homework, but you give them homework and you hold them accountable and you check up with them on that. And it's task and goal oriented sort of.
Yeah. So there are actually always 3 pieces to the homework. And I call it groundwork because it's grown-up homework. So there's always action steps. There's always a reflection about what's going on. So much like with that mirror practice, what do you notice at the end of 7 days? Right? What changes? Because when we notice whatever we notice more and we build more of. So there's always an appreciation of what work we're doing. There's always action steps. And then there is always an accountability piece. And that might be somebody checking in emails. It might be a text message in the morning or the evening when they've done whatever they've agreed to do. But part of my job is to kick people's butts and make sure that they're actually keeping with whatever they have committed to doing for themselves or their company.
Okay, so with all this and somebody that's self-employed and they're working a lot in their business and on their business, how important is work-life balance within that?
So work is part of life.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're spending all your time at work, then you're missing out on some of your own life. If you're spending all your time with your life and you're avoiding work, that is also an indication that maybe the work you're doing isn't aligned with your core values or who you are. And so this idea about work being separate from life, when you start to see that your work is part of your life, it makes it a lot easier to start to come into a much better balance with how you spend your time throughout your day, throughout your week, and so that you feel refreshed and you feel relaxed and you feel like you have a level of enjoyment and entertainment and happiness and joyfulness. And that's really what we're going for. I mean, my biggest goal and the reason I became a coach was that I love what I do every day. I love running my business. I love having, time to interact with people and talk with people. And I really love seeing them make the change so that they understand, oh, wow, if I just choose this, I get to create a whole different way of being in the world. And I get to create a whole different way for my company to be in the world, or for my partner to be in the world, or for my kids. And so for me, that's the payoff, is to really allow those choices for people and have them see that, yeah, I have a choice about how I spend my day. And sometimes the choice is, yeah, I'm going to spend it doing 10 to 14 hours of work on my business because I want A, B, or C. And that's what that requires. But it's very different to say, I really want to do this. I want to grow my business. I want to spend 10 hours a day for a while doing that. And to say, oh, I have to. Oh, my business is failing. I have to spend 10 hours on it. Because even the energy, Mari, you were talking about the energy behind things. It depends, if you bring a lot of happy, up, kind of positive energy to things, it always feels like it's a lot more fun to be doing. But if you bring this energy of I have to, I should, I need to, it becomes a slog no matter what you're doing, even if it's something you really like. Like, go walk at the Arboretum. Oh, yes, I love doing that. I want to do that. Go walk at the Arboretum. Oh, I have to walk at the Arboretum because I said I would. Same action, different energy.
Yeah. I realized I love what I do because I was daydreaming with my wife one day about what if we won the lottery. And I was like, I would still do what I do if I won the lottery. Maybe not at the pace I do it or at the volume I do it, but one of my goals too has always been to want to do a not-for-profit accounting firm to help those that can't afford accountants. But it's all about me today.
But I've heard you talk about that too.
Yeah.
I mean, when you and I have sat down to talk about things, your passion for what you do comes across every single time we've sat down for lunch or sat down just to hang out. And that's the thing for me. It's like, okay, so when people connect with the thing that they're really passionate about, they're going to talk about it. They're going to make it into something amazing because that's what's driving them.
Yeah. So I just did a podcast so I can record it about it.
And one of the things that you really talked about in the last few minutes here is managing self.
Mm-hmm.
And go into more of that. What does it mean to be a manager of myself and my staff or employees versus the traditional, I guess I would think of management?
Right. So one of the ways that I often think about it is that when we're managing things, it often means that we are trying to do something the way we think it should go instead of paying attention to what's actually in front of us. And it feels like a task or a chore. So managing yourself the same way if you think about managing your employees or your business or your company as a way to create a particular culture around certain values. When you are managing yourself, it also means that you're aware of how you're showing up. what's the energy I'm bringing to this? And is that moving me towards or away from the goals I want? You can also talk about managing self in a way that allows some more spaciousness and freedom. And it also will allow you to make different choices because you're not adhering to what some other person's idea about your company or yourself is. They talk about it a lot in kindergarten these days, actually, where they teach kids how to manage their own emotions, and they teach them to separate the awareness of what they're feeling from the action they take next. So that's a really basic part around managing self that a lot of people, we grow up and we forget, oh, right, my response ability is different than my action ability. And the two can be related, but they don't have to always trigger each other in a certain way.
No, I was just thinking back, daydreaming there while you were talking. I was listening, I promise. But I was daydreaming about when we first met. And Amy and I met a few years ago now in a networking group together.
Yeah.
And, I was ignorant on all things life, as I am typically on a lot of things. But I remember you getting up talking about what you did and just thinking about how it was just filling a void or creating an opportunity in what you do for something you never realized was something like that you did. Like I didn't realize it was a thing at the time. So it was really neat. And I love hearing you talk about it. And I just think what you do is a great service for people, many people that don't realize they would need it. But if they engage with somebody like you or the life coach like you, what they can accomplish or what, how that can further them, not only in their personal life, but in their careers. And it's a great compliment. I think that everybody at least at some point in their life should engage with a life coach.
Well, I'll agree with that. Including me, because I do have a coach. And I think every good coach has a coach, the same way every good accountant has an accountant, or every good business owner has.
Well, I'm my own accountant.
Well, geez, but you're amazing. But almost, if you look at how do we learn how to be better at what we do? Well, we have somebody else who's been doing it longer, or is more highly trained, or has a different skill set or perspective. And really coaching, particularly life coaching, because it means that I get to coach people in a whole bunch of areas. I get to bring my perspective. So I'm seeing things that maybe somebody else might not see because they're in the system. Yeah. One of the things you reminded me of from that group that I remember being like the most amazed, and it's just really fun when I work with people. I had a client a number of years ago who showed up and she said, oh, I don't really know what career I want. And so we were working on that. And in the 3 months that she worked with me, she found a new career, started school for it, met the love of her life, got engaged, and figured out her own spirituality.
Wow.
Now, all of that came out of career coaching. But again, it's all interrelated because we're human beings and that's what we do. How we do one thing is how we do everything.
Well, I think what I like about it is that you started off the session with talking about having a good advisor. And in many ways, finding a good advisor that you're not related to, that it's not personal, they don't know your history, they are able to see things and pick up on things that you can't see yourself, of course, and that maybe those around you that are very close to you don't want to tell you, or maybe you just don't even listen to them anymore. So I think it's very good to have an objective advisor that is willing to ask the questions and also provide the feedback that person probably needs to hear. And then also that encouragement that maybe they're not getting, from their, I guess, innermost circles.
Yeah, part of it is I have a very hard and fast rule. I do not coach friends and family. And I don't coach them for a couple reasons. One is if I'm going to really coach them, then I have to be able to be honest with them. And they don't want that kind of honesty from a friend or family member. The other thing is that for most people, and we all have I've got great friends who I call when I really need somebody's shoulder to cry on or I need to run something by them. But they also very often, because they don't have the training, they always are going to give me their opinion or their idea about how or what I should do. And that goes back to the piece about training. When you are trained as a coach, one of the things you learn to do is to let go of what you want and what you think is the best way, and listen for what the person you're working with. So I listen for what my clients want. Whether I agree with it or not has nothing to do with it. My job is to get them to where they want to be, because for them, that's the thing that's key. So being that, as you said, and the way to be an objective advisor is so that I can see where they want to get to, and that's my job. It's irrelevant what I think of where they're going.
Well, I would say that in today's world especially, it seems that people are more distracted. We have digital distractions out the wazoo. People are hooked on their cell phones with constant information being fed. We have busier, it seems, schedules. And so a little bit of what you do, it sounds to me, helps people sort of stop all of that. And though we think we're being engaged in those activities, we're really not.
Yeah.
So you said something that is interesting about from the very beginning, moving forward and thinking forward.
Yep.
So I think a lot of the times the distractions that we have in our life are not about thinking forward. They're just about not doing anything at all.
Yeah, there's a lot of procrastination that happens, and some of it's intentional, some of it's unintentional. One thing, this whole idea about, and I think it's been debunked now, human beings cannot multitask. We are physically incapable of it. It's not how our brains work. But we can context switch really quickly. The problem with doing that is every time you switch, you still need to come back up to speed on whatever the new task is. So if you're going back and forth between two things, you're actually ineffective. It's much better to stick with one thing for a while, because then you get in the groove, you get in the flow, and you become much more efficient at what you're working on. So all of the electronic devices that we have, while I am a total tech geek and I love these devices, they also are pushing us to act and react in a time frame that actually isn't human-based, it's machine-based. So that can be problematic. Again, you see it everywhere, and you notice it if you let go of all your electronics for one whole day, and you notice how you feel at the end of the day when you get home. It's a really interesting experiment to try.
Well, I did that about a year ago. Before I started this office, I switched to a phone that was just a flip phone. And I did that for a year. All my friends thought I was crazy. I had girlfriends that wouldn't let me bring out my phone in public. They were so embarrassed to be seen with that. But I loved it. And I realized then where I was wasting the most amount of my time and being distracted when I was around loved ones and so forth. I encourage everybody to force themselves to take a year off from the cell phone. And people said, I don't understand how you can do that when you're in marketing or you're in a business where you work with so many people via computer. And I said, but I made it work. I think we tell ourselves we can't make it work, but you can make it work. There was a time when we did that.
We survived the 80s and 90s and prior.
Yeah.
But another thing you touched on that I would like you to address is you mentioned frequently culture that we want and who we are. So talk about that a little bit more.
So who we are shows up in the kind of culture that we create in the businesses we run. It also shows up in how we work with teams within our businesses. And so by understanding, not only if you're a business owner, you want to understand what culture are you creating in your business. Because whether you're doing it intentionally or not, you are creating a culture. You're creating a way that people are going to interact with each other. You're creating a way that problems get solved. And if you want a business that will be really solid and foundational and grow, then you need to create a culture that encourages that. So if you have middle managers or managers who are always yelling at people, that's probably not going to create growth. But if you notice that, well, you're always yelling at those same people, well, that's where it's coming from. So there's a method of servant leadership that you can bring in, but it's also being aware of, if I know that I am really bitchy before 7 a.m. if I haven't had a cup of coffee, then it's probably better if I make sure that all my meetings start around 8:30 in the morning so that I have time to wake up, I have time to have my coffee, I can check the news, I can get my day started so that by the time I have that first meeting, I'm in a totally calm state of mind, and I'm going to show up in that state of mind for my company or my employees or my team. So part of that is that, again, we're back to self-awareness and managing self. Once you're aware of your own habits and how they're showing up, then it becomes a lot easier to create a culture or a team or a group that is going to work towards growth mindset and growth in terms of the business rather than a kind of, well, I'm out for me and screw everybody else.
So maybe if you have a lot of high turnover, or you seem to have a lot of unhappiness in your business and employees, maybe that might be a clue that
Big
the
clue.
problem might be you,
Yeah.
and you need to address it.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, because it's something that you're either not saying or you are saying that is encouraging or allowing that kind of behavior. And if you don't know that that's going on and you think, oh, okay, I don't have that at my company, we don't have that kind of thing happening, just start to listen in on conversations around a lunchroom or in the hallways, or ask some of the people lowest down, get spies seriously and ask and find out, well, what is the real culture? Or find a couple people who seem to have a chip on their shoulder and listen to what they'll tell you about. Because if they have a chip on their shoulder, it's there for a reason. And if you get one or two honest people who are like, this is what's going wrong in this area, or this is what I see happening, it's really frustrating every single day. If you can hear those things, then you get a chance to create a change. And the change will always lead to growth.
Well, and the other thing that you mentioned several times is how people will say, I don't know what I want to do. They're very ambiguous. I don't know what I want to do with my career, or I don't know what's bothering me, but I'm unhappy. And it sounds like it's pointing back to finding, which another thing you've mentioned, your authentic self.
It is.
And finding who that is. How do you start that process when somebody comes at you that ambiguously?
I love it because it's an open book. So when they start with just the I don't know is a great place to start, because if you know you don't know, then everything is possible. And really, it's about starting with what are the core values for that person. So for me, my 3 core values are honesty, risk-taking, and curiosity. And no matter what, even if it would probably get me into hot water, I have been a risk taker all my life, and I've been really honest. So there was a good example is I worked as a consultant for a camera company, and I was the technical rep. And I got to meet the new president in Germany. Great guy, awesome guy who took this company over. And he sat me down, and he knew I was new, and he asked me, so what do you think of this brand new camera that you're the tech rep for and the whole system? And I said, do you want my honest opinion? And he said, well, yeah, otherwise I wouldn't have asked. And I said, well, it's overpriced. American market's never going to pay for it. Here's where I see your competitors are. Here's where I think you should make some changes in the pricing and what you're offering. Oh, and by the way, these other 3 things are not working on the camera. And he sat back and he went, thank you. And I said, but certainly you've heard that from your marketing people. He goes, nope, none of them would tell me that. And again, he and I were working towards the same goal, which was success of this product. So I think that there's an aspect of, it could have gone very differently. He could have been some guy who was like, I don't want to hear that. I only want yes people. And I probably would have been fired. So again, my core values of honesty and curiosity and risk-taking all came into play there. And I didn't have anything conscious. I wasn't thinking about, I'm going to take this risk. I was like, okay, you asked me what I thought. I'm going to tell you what I think. And in part, that comes up